So I would consider myself an extremely big Zelda fan, we're talking at least this big. However, I have to admit one very embarrassing fact about myself. I have never beaten Ocarina of Time. The key word there is beaten. I have played it multiple times, but one part of the game scared me so bad as a kid that I just couldn't ever go back. I know a lot about the game since I've watched a plethora of speedruns and lore videos, but I should still have a relatively good time getting to see the whole package as it was meant to be. But in an attempt to stand out, because Ocarina of Time has been reviewed to hell and back by a multitude of channels, I'm gonna be tossing in little tidbits about the development whenever possible. Same goes for Majora's Mask as well. So grab some snacks, sit back, and relax as I talk about Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. Our journey begins with the Deku Tree deciding it's time for Link, to get his own fairy named Navi, who got her name because she, well, navigates. And she's a tad annoying at the start, not because she ruined my sleep or anything, but her text boxes are slow, man. Chop chop, speed it up, I got places to be and coochie powers to get. I feel a lot of people share the same sentiment after playing Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, where you miss the more traditional Zelda games. But man, I didn't realize how bad I missed it until I went back, and I'm not only talking about the dungeons, which I will get to later. Being properly rewarded for exploring and doing side quests feels so good, it's enough to make a grown man cry. I get the fun brain tinglies whenever I get a new item or complete a heart container. Something I realized during this playthrough is there's quite a few things I just don't know if I'm doing the quote-unquote intended way, but that's what makes games fun. No matter how late you are to the party, you can still have a unique experience. If you're curious why I never beat Ocarina of Time, well, I went into this house, saw the spider, and closed the game. That was like almost 10 years ago, and I never went back after. But hey, at least I got to experience the adult portion of the game mostly blind, which was very fun. Most of the characters are pretty great, especially Link, Zelda, and Ganondorf. They gave characters that you won't see more than a couple times at least one memorable moment, even if sometimes they are a little mean. Hey, I'll have you know it stands for Bastidius Ulcers Tut Tut. Not so bad now, huh? One of the key things I was really fond of is how stark of a difference child and adult Link's Hyrules are. For reasons that are probably weird, because to me it sort of reminded me of how life actually is, where as a child you have this almost whimsical view on the world with very little responsibility, aside from, you know, getting the spiritual stones, but outside of that you can really have all the fun you want playing minigames and robbing people blind of all their money. Once you go 7 years into the future by pulling the Master Sword, Hyrule becomes much darker and run down, at least the market section. And your responsibilities are a lot more serious because Ganon has taken control of Hyrule Castle and kidnapped Zelda. Now, obviously most people's lives don't involve that sort of stuff, but I replaced it with a real world equivalent like school or work, and it's pretty accurate to how my life was and has been. Originally, you weren't going to seamlessly explore Hyrule. Since Nintendo only had made Star Fox and Mario 64 at that point, they still weren't sure how far they could push the N64, so Ganon's castle was going to act as a hub and you travel through Mario 64-esque paintings. And you can sort of see remnants of that idea in the Phantom Ganon boss fight, as the room is filled with paintings that he can go through. I wasn't too big a fan of exploring up until I got Epona, because we love her in this house. Ingo was maybe obsessed with her too much though, since the first idea for after he loses the race was to have him burn the ranch to the ground and have a fiery background as you jump over the fence. I like how they decided that was too far, but then went on to create the absolute war crime that is the Water Temple. Deadass, if you asked me to play through it again or I'd have to be tortured in Guantanamo Bay, I'm choosing Guantanamo 9 times out of 10. I'm very glad that the temples never got spoiled for me over the years. The most I knew about them were the names, and it was fun to go through them without a guide. I only really needed one for the temple that shall not be named. I realized during this playthrough that only having a couple of ways to solve a puzzle feels good. Don't get me wrong, I love the open-ended puzzle style of the later games, but something about having expertly designed puzzles just feels more fun to solve, especially once you get that aha moment. And every dungeon had a great variety of them, which helped each dungeon feel even more unique outside of their general theme and atmosphere, which is elevated by the music that I wasn't really a fan of. Every other song outside of the temples I like, but hearing the temple songs for like 1 to 2 hours just gave me a slight headache. What didn't give me a headache though is the awesome boss fights. Every single one is very unique, including the mini bosses, and it was fun to figure out how to reveal their weaknesses. I wish I was playing the 3DS version so I could do the boss rush, because once you get the patterns down it becomes very fun to see how fast you can beat them. Ocarina of Time's combat is inspired by Chambara, and I ended up enjoying the more methodical, patient style of combat, especially when it came to sword fights which require you to dodge and try to attack within the short time window you get. It definitely made me enjoy the Thieves' Hideout a tad more since the sneaking part was rough, but there's a few one-on-one sword fights which are also some of the most fun outside of the boss fights. I'm just as disappointed in me as you are that I have never beaten Ocarina of Time, but everyone has a chance to right their wrongs, and I couldn't be happier I did. Without a doubt, this game has easily shot up to one of my favorites in the series. Everything is great, from the music, to the combat, to the dungeons and temples, and even all the optional minigames and side quests. The climax is also sick as hell. I've seen the final fight plenty of times, but I completely forgot about the fact Ganondorf plays the organ and it gets louder as you ascend the tower. It's so fucking cool. I also had no idea that the ending sort of connected to Majora's Mask. Speaking of which, we still have a whole ass other game to talk about. I played Majora's Mask a hell of a lot on my 3DS. I'm pretty sure I was close to having 600 hours on it. Unfortunately, I don't have my 3DS anymore, so I haven't been able to play it in like 6 years. However, this time I'll be experiencing the N64 version, which is basically the same game, but some things were changed around in the remake, so I'm sure that'll be great for my muscle memory. Majora's Mask was one of the first games I played that had a dark story and gave me plenty of nightmare fuel. Ben Drowned was also my first exposure to the world of creepypastas, which I'd be totally down to do like a deep dive into that story for Halloween if you're all interested in that. But let's get back on topic and talk more about Majora's Mask. It's pretty impressive that this game exists in the state it is because it was cobbled together in less than 2 years, which is a miracle that they were able to repurpose Ocarina of Time's assets and characters to create a new world and story within the time given. And it ended up being my favorite Zelda game for a while. I'm pretty solidified on my opinion that this game has my favorite opening in the entire franchise. It sets up the anxious and uneasy feeling the rest of the game has. You start in a very foggy forest as Link starts searching for Navi since she peaced out at the end of Ocarina of Time, and I don't know if his head being down is supposed to convey he's sad, but it does to me, which we really didn't see that side of Link at all in the previous game. But oh boy, it doesn't end there because Skull Kid sends his fairies after him and then steals Epona. On top of that, Link gets turned into a Deku Scrub after being horrified. Oh, that's gore of my comfort character. Clock Town is mostly normal on the surface. Oh, you've gotta be kidding me. Termina does a fantastic job of giving a surreal feeling as you explore, since around every corner is some sort of unsettling thing, like some creepy guy dancing in the middle of the night, a hand in a toilet, to aliens trying to abduct cows. And more obviously, the big ol' moon with a creepy face that just stares at you as it brings despair to Termina. I really enjoy the 3-day system in this game. It made my first playthrough feel very stressful since I didn't know about the inverted Song of Time, which slows the clock down. So not only was time going pretty quick, but you also gotta figure out what side quests are available during what days on top of attempting to beat whatever dungeon, all while trying not to die from Mr. Moon as I showed earlier. However, repeat playthroughs end up feeling more satisfying as you can end up doing multiple things throughout one cycle, which feels good to pull off, especially if it comes down to the wire. The final day will always be stress-inducing because the world will rumble violently as the moon inches ever closer to your demise, and the atmosphere is completely different, where in the first day everybody's excited to celebrate the Carnival of Time. The second day people are still excited, but it's harder to ignore the impending doom. The dawn of the third day is when things get real freaky. The music is dramatically different. It's way quicker, a lot of the instruments from the second day are stripped away, and it's replaced with loud, ominous sounds. Also, many of the NPCs are in hiding as they've accepted their fate, and once the final hours hit, that hopelessness settles snugly in as you can only watch Termina and its residents get crushed. I make it a point in every Zelda game to at least get all the heart pieces because it's usually a fun challenge to find them and do the minigames. And while that remains mostly true for Majora's Mask, I unfortunately couldn't finish the shooting minigames since they require basically perfect execution, and that's just not fun because the aiming sucks. However, I did enjoy collecting all the masks since a lot of them have their own little stories. For instance, listening to Guru Guru confess will net you a mask which lets you march for chicks to grow into roosters so this guy can die happily. Or doing one of the best side quests in the entire franchise, which is Anju and Kafei's quest, where you have to do a multitude of things throughout the 3-day cycle, like solving puzzles while switching between both Kafei and Link, which was fun and anxiety inducing since you're on a timer and it's just thrown on you out of nowhere. But the ultimate goal of doing all that is saving Anju and Kafei's marriage, who get back together 1 hour before the moon drops and they just stay and die in each other's arms. While we're on the emotional topic, getting Mikau's mask is probably still the most hard-hitting moment for me in the game. Having to just swim out and push his soon-to-be lifeless corpse to shore and listen to his final song before having to bury him, and just posing as him while everyone he knows is none the wiser is pretty heartbreaking. It definitely made me cry a bit when I was younger. You get rewarded with what is probably my favorite Link design if you get all the masks. That being Fierce Deity Link. Like, you can't look at this guy and tell me it's not peak character design. Part of me wishes they made a game dedicated to Fierce Deity, but at least I can use the glitch that lets you explore as him while I wait in eternity. The temples I found to be a bit more complex in Majora's Mask compared to Ocarina of Time. Not necessarily because the puzzles were harder, but with the addition of stray fairies it just means there's naturally more things to do since they can be in a random enemy, just chillin', or you'll have to solve a puzzle. Snowhead Temple was a bit more annoying than I remember, not for any of the puzzles or stray fairies, but the little sides you have to roll over. Maybe this is a Mandela effect, but I'm pretty sure the 3DS version controlled a lot tighter while rolling around, and in this version it felt way more sensitive, leading me to fall down and have to climb back up. And I swear water temples are just forever gonna be a curse for me. The waterbed temple was pretty decent, but I managed to get soft lock, like what in the Houdini is this shit? I also found the stray fairies a bit more difficult to find in it. I'm not sure if that was just a side effect of my morale being low after the soft lock though. The boss fights are a bit more simple than I remember. I guess the addition of eyeballs in the 3DS version helped with the simplicity a little bit. But in this version, it's just basically get close and hit them, so in that regard, they're a bit less creative than other Zelda bosses, aside from Twin Mode, which lets you go big mode and fuck his shit up. Both of these games still feel very good to go back to today, aside from a few things like aiming. And it feels very nice to have Ocarina of Time finally crossed off my finished games list after all these years. And I was surprised how much I enjoyed it even though I knew like half the game. Also, getting to play Majora's Mask again after many years was a great time. Ironically, it's kind of a comfort game for me despite